So, I want to talk about the apps that we're creating for online map collections. Let me start out with talking about online map collections and why they're important or why we think they're important. We want to be able to enhance the use of map collections that are often stored in libraries, in map drawers. They're not getting used because they're paper maps, and most things are digital nowadays. So it behooves us to try and turn them into something digital, and that will increase the use of the map collection. And if we're able to do that, then what we want to do is have an interactive and online experience for the users so they can peruse that collection, but even do more. They might be able to browse it, they could search it, they can compare images, they can download images. They maybe even could share what they're looking on at the screen and share that with other people. An important thing to note is that we're also thinking of these as archival quality images. If you're going through the process of scanning and georeferencing, then if these images are also a way to preserve the original record, you're killing two birds with one stone. Having said that, because they're archival quality, we're also assuming that you're not doing a lot of tweaking to the images. They're being scanned as is. You're not doing any changes in color correction or you know, changing, if they got warped, changing them back to their original sizes, et cetera, et cetera. Nonetheless, we are assuming that these are scanned and georeferenced, so these maps are able to be placed in a real world coordinate system. So that's what we think of as an online map collection. And we have been working on some apps to support these types of collections. There are a couple of examples that I'll talk about, and then I'll talk about our most recent project. But one of the examples was simply using existing ESRI Storymaps apps. And if you are familiar with those apps, they can be combined. And one of our cartographers took two of the series applications, they're called Storymaps series. One is tabbed with the tabs across the top that you can see in gray here, and the other one is called a side accordion with the information along the side. So he combined those two apps to create an Atlas app that supports our demographic and statistical information from some of the maps in the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. We also created, a number of years ago now, I want to say it's about 3 or 4 years ago, the HistoricalTopoMap Explorer. This allows users to explore a continually updated repository of USGS scanned and georeferenced topographic maps, or you might call them quadrangles or quads. This, as I said, is an ever-expanding collection, so when we started out with about 186,000 maps in the collection, we are now working with the USGS on quarterly updates to expand that collection, and right now we're around 200,000. The updates include new maps that have been scanned and corrections to maps that maybe were georeferenced, for example, incorrectly, and we caught the errors. So the application we created for that was very simple and intuitive, which, contrary to most things that ESRI does, was a little surprising because it was really easy to move through the application. It wasn't huge and cumbersome and hard to figure out what was going on. Sort of stepped you through in a 1, 2, 3 method, gave you some prompts, and then allowed you some functionality, for example, to place two maps on top of each other and move the transparency of the map on the top so you could compare two maps of different time periods. You chose those maps off the bottom where there was a timeline that showed not just when the map was published, but the scale of the map. And then you could download the image and you could share the current map view with other users. So the current project that we're working on is an app to share the maps that are in this data atlas from NOAA. And there are about 99 maps. There are additional pages, but we're not concerned about those. The maps themselves are about 4 feet wide and 3 feet high, and they came in an original binder that had 3 rings in it, so we could simply, actually had more rings in it. You can sort of see the rings along the side here of the scanned map, and we could open the rings on the binder and pull out each map, scan it, georeference it, and begin to think about how to share that collection. But in addition to the map, there were other things. The map itself was there, but there was a beautiful little sketch of the animal or the invertebrate or the fish or the mammal that was being depicted on the map. A lot of reference information in textual format. The references in the textual information and at the bottom linked to an additional like 5 or 6 pages, remember 4 feet by 3 feet, of references, so it was a very heavily referenced document. There's also a legend, and down at the bottom, a repetitive, this is the same map on every single page. It just shows where the extent of the map area was. But for each map, the map extent did not change. So this was kind of a redundant little thing at the bottom. Okay, so we came up with a methodology to take the maps all the way from their paper format through scanning and georeferencing into a format that we could ultimately serve them on the web. And I'm not going to go through any of this because this has been heavily documented. There are resources that you can download, example maps, map packages, tools, et cetera, that allow you to follow this workflow. It's actually fairly simple. But it's already been documented. I already talked about it. Slides are all on SlideShare, so you can find them there. But what I do want to talk about is the app. And the app for this collection of maps is a little different because as we saw with the USGS quad sheets, and if you're familiar with quad sheets, almost any quad sheet series, a lot of the maps do overlap because they are the same area at different points in time or at different scales. And they also are often contiguous because the next map sheet over is the next area in space. So in the methodology that we developed, we figured out how we could clip what we're calling the collar off the map, and then the map content will abut right next to each other. And we also allow it to show different scales and also information through time. But this map collection is different because, as in many thematic atlases, the extent is the same, the time period is roughly the same, but the themes change. So in this collection, we're trying to find a way to share same area, same time, different themes. So when people come to this collection, we want them to be able to browse it just like the book. They want to maybe read it from beginning to end, or they want to flip through pages. We also want them to be able to search for the content, assuming that they might know the name of something they wanted to look for, like a polar bear or a particular tern or some kind of a salamander. Then, of course, there are the scientists working with the book so that search should allow both the Latin name and the common name. People might want to compare content. They might want to see the ranges of 2 different mammals to see if they're roughly equivalent or if they're quite different. And we also might want to have them, for other map collections, if we're thinking a broader sense, that maybe they want to compare to locations that are similar or to locations that change over time. We want them to be able to download the images. We've already given them this capability. I think one of the rules that people are wise to follow is that once you give people capability, don't take it away from them. So we gave them the ability to download. We've got to keep that capability. We gave them the ability to take a sort of a snapshot of what the view looked like when they were interacting with it and then share that out through a link. So we want to be able to do that again. Okay. So to develop this app, we're working with our app designers, and one of the people who has weighed in on this a little bit is John Nelson, so you'll see some of his work here. But what we tried to stress to the app designers is we are really trying to share the content that is currently in that atlas. We're not introducing new content. We're not comparing the current content with information that's not in the atlas. So it's a little tricky working with the app designers because they're constantly thinking about, oh, if that's the picture of the past, then we could also compare it to the current. And we're like, No. We're keeping the content that was in the atlas. We're just trying to share this archived collection. We're not adding additional information. So it's a bit of a challenge to try and scale them back. And most of you guys know John Nelson from his presentations. He's a tough one to scale back too, but he had some great ideas. So very helpful input to the project. So no new content right now. Now you're seeing John's contributions. The idea is that every map every map page will be pretty much laid out the same because it is in the book. So there's a main map window, and that is what you could see if you were zoomed out to the largest extent. I will say one thing at this point. This is an adaptable app, so it can be used on any device, even down to your smartphone. Remember that we've got a 4-foot by 3-foot atlas that we're trying to share in this space. So while it can be used on a tablet or a smartphone, it's going to be a better experience in sort of either a large tablet or a computer screen environment. Okay, there's content on those pages that we don't want to lose just because it's not in map format. So the sketches are fantastic. They would fit within the screen and they're at a good resolution. We don't need to worry about the little map at the bottom right. As I said, it's redundant, but the legend is critical. And the legend is critical at the scale of the map that it was originally printed. So this is a big challenge for us. We haven't completely solved it yet, but right now the idea is just to take the scan of the legend and to provide it as a visual. OCR the text and allow people to search the text as well. So then we put it back together on the map page and then put some things in the user interface as well. The map goes back in, the sketch is displayed at the same time. Interface allows ability to get back to the other content as well. But the header bar at the top allows a search. The drop down on the top right allows the ability to get to things like the legend. The little links underneath the sketch allow you to share through social media or save something as a favorite or find out more information. Regular pan and zoom, controls at the bottom right, and then a search bar along the bottom. Sort of a very, again, simple, scaled down interface. So when you click, for example, the information button, you begin to see that all that rich content that was carried in the text, and it's just displayed in a sidebar that opens up, and you can close if you don't want it. The legend as well. Again, as I mentioned, the legend is a bit of a trick because it's not the same at the scale of the legend as it is at the scale of the map and the map view. I have some ideas about that, and if you have ideas too, I'd love to hear them. But I think we can conquer this. And the search, I think, is a critical thing because people think about things in different ways, so they're going to parse their information and look for their information in different ways as well. They might look by chapter, as you would in the table of contents of a book. But if they're familiar with the contents already, or they're looking for something in particular, we want to allow them the ability to search, for example, by name. And then John thought, well, you know, why don't we allow them to search by the size of the creature? And it's not something that's not doable for us. There might be some information in that rich textual content, but also there's a scale bar on every sketch. So I could actually measure the size of these critters and just allow people to look at things in a slightly different way. The other thing, as I said, we're trying to use content that's already in the atlas. I thought, why don't we use the information on the place names map, because that might help people to orient themselves. Normally what we would say is, let's put the content on one of the ESRI base maps, but when you do that, it's a mishmash of information that's completely illegible, as you can well imagine. So instead, I digitized the names off of the place names page, and I thought, well, let's just make that be something they can turn on and off, and they can lay it on top of any of the other pages. Now, while it looks like it works out pretty well for this caribou page, there may be place names on the caribou page that are also on the place names template, so they will overlap. But I don't think that's a big problem because you can just toggle it on and off and you can see the one name or the both, whatever names you want to look at. I will point out one thing in creating this place names map. This map, or this atlas, was created in the 70s. So when I went to just digitize the names, I think these were rub-on letters. Anybody know about rub-on letters? Well, I think they were rub-on letters because they're not even equally spaced within a name. I mean, if you look over here, you can see, like, I can get the first letter of Arctic and the last letter of ocean, but I can't get anything to line up in between. So these will not complete, and I was not going to go in and move every single piece of text. I just thought that's not important because they're going to toggle this thing on and off, right? They're going to see the mess if they lay it on the place names map, but they're not going to see the real mess if they lay it on most other things like the caribou map. So I just wanted to point that out, you know, trying to reconstruct something that was constructed a number of years ago using the technology that we don't have now. Just don't do it. Okay, so I would be remiss if I did not point out the beautiful Audubon Atlas that came out this year. I'm pretty sure it was this year. Have you seen it? If you have not seen it, you have got to go see it. Our beloved Daniel Huffman worked on this with University of Wisconsin Lab and the Audubon Society in Alaska, and it's fantastic. It won the ICA IMIA award at the ESRI User Conference this year. It's just gorgeous. So I encourage you to check that out. But I did notice that even though they're sort of reconstructing the same atlas we were working on, it's not the same content. For example, when I look at the information in the chapters, I don't have caribou. I do have polar bears and other things, but I don't have caribou. So, you know, thinking forward, well, we've got our atlas, there's their atlas, could we combine them? It's not exactly the same. But I do suggest that you go look at that because it's another beautiful example of an online atlas. So ours is still under construction. I'm told that I'll finally get our app designers and app developers in attention before the end of the year. So I'm hoping that I'll have something to show the next time I see you folks, and maybe even before. But I'm going to end there and just sort of let you know that it's all hanging in the ether right now, and say thank you and ask you if you have any questions.